"Don't move," the Virgin Maid whispered, then kissed the billionaire to save his life. It was supposed to be a normal work night in the world's tallest penthouse, until her boss collapsed, gasping for air. With no one else around, she did the unthinkable, risking everything to save him. But the next morning, her heroic kiss becomes a global scandal. The world calls her a temptress. Reporters swarm. The billionaire she saved? He's torn between gratitude and the storm that could destroy them both. Yet something deeper is happening. Behind all the cameras and lies, a bond is forming. She gave him breath, but now he might lose his heart. When fame, faith, and truth collide, can an innocent maid and a broken billionaire survive the cost of a miracle, or will the kiss that saved his life ruin them both forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Crossline Tower's penthouse, casting shifting shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Adrian Cross stood motionless, his tall frame silhouetted against New York City's glittering skyline. The lights of neighboring skyscrapers pierced through the stormy darkness like distant stars. But he barely noticed their beauty tonight. His left hand clutched at his chest, fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his tailored suit. The pain had been getting worse over the past hour, spreading from his chest down his left arm. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the climate-controlled room. "It's nothing," he muttered to himself, voice rough. The empty penthouse swallowed his words. His assistant, Margaret, had left hours ago after trying unsuccessfully to convince him to leave early. But Adrian Cross didn't leave early. Ever. The empire he'd built from his brother's failing business demanded constant attention. Thunder rolled outside as another wave of pain hit him. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Calling for help meant showing weakness, and weakness was something Adrian Cross had sworn never to show again. 80 floors below, Daisy Alvarez moved her mop across the lobby's marble floor in slow, careful strokes. Her arms ached from hours of cleaning, but she kept working, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Lord, please give me strength," she whispered, pausing to push a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Help me do my best in this new job." The lobby sparkled under the warm lighting, and Daisy felt a small surge of pride. Her first week at the Crossline Tower had been overwhelming. The luxury, the demanding residence, the sheer scale of the building. But she was grateful for the live-in position, even if some of the other staff looked down on her modest background. Lightning flashed outside the lobby's glass doors as Daisy finished her work. She checked her watch. 8:30 in the evening. One last task remained: delivering fresh towels to the penthouse. Her heart beat a little faster at the thought. She'd never met Mr. Cross, but his reputation for being cold and demanding was well known among the staff. The service elevator hummed as it carried her up 80 floors. Daisy clutched the stack of fluffy white towels to her chest, using their fresh laundry smell to calm her nerves. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, and she stepped out quietly. "Hello," she called softly. "Housekeeping." No answer came. The penthouse was dimly lit, with only city lights providing illumination through the rain-streaked windows. Daisy moved carefully through the space, her soft-soled shoes silent on the floor. That's when she saw him. Mr. Cross lay crumpled on the floor near the windows, one hand still clutching his chest. His face was grey, his breathing shallow and laboured. "Oh my God!" Daisy dropped the towels and rushed to his side. "Mr. Cross, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered, but he couldn't speak. With trembling fingers, Daisy pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The call connected for a moment, then dropped as thunder boomed overhead. No, 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 she muttered, trying again. No signal. The storm must have knocked out service. Daisy's mind raced. She'd never faced an emergency like this, but something stirred in her memory. A first aid video shown years ago at her foster home. The instructor's voice echoed in her head. Sometimes the simplest actions can save a life. Kneeling beside Adrian's prone form, Daisy tried to steady her shaking hands. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. She tilted his head back gently, checking his airway. His breathing was getting weaker. Taking a deep breath, Daisy pinched his nose and sealed her mouth over his, breathing air into his lungs. His chest rose slightly, then fell. She did it again, praying harder than she'd ever prayed before. Suddenly, Adrian gasped and coughed weakly. His breathing was still labored, but his eyes focused on her face with confusion. Without hesitation, Daisy gave him another rescue breath, making sure his airway stayed clear. The penthouse door burst open, and paramedics rushed in with their equipment. Someone must have called them. Perhaps security had noticed something on the cameras. "What happened?" one paramedic asked, kneeling beside them. "I found him collapsed," Daisy explained, her voice shaking. "He was having trouble breathing. I tried to call 911, but the storm—" "You did good," the paramedic assured her, quickly checking Adrian's vital signs. "Looks like a cardiac event. Let's get him stabilized." Daisy moved back, watching as they worked efficiently around Adrian. They attached monitors, started an IV, and carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. His eyes found hers for a moment before they wheeled him away, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude. Left alone in the suddenly quiet penthouse, Daisy sank down onto a nearby chair. Her whole body trembled as the adrenaline began to fade. The abandoned towels lay scattered on the floor where she'd dropped them, and the rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. She looked down at her hands that had just helped save a life. They were still shaking. In all her prayers for strength in her new job, she'd never imagined being tested like this. The memory of his lips under hers, not in passion but in desperate necessity, would stay with her forever. Daisy didn't know it then, but that moment of crisis would change both their lives in ways she couldn't imagine. For now, she simply sat in the dimly lit penthouse, listening to the storm and whispering a prayer of thanks that she'd been there when needed. The next morning's grey light filtered through the small window of Daisy's staff quarters. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the previous night like a movie she couldn't pause. The feeling of Mr. Cross's cold lips, the desperate moments of breathing life into him, the chaos of the paramedics arriving. It all swirled in her thoughts. Sleep had been elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his pale face and felt the terror of those moments when his life hung in the balance. She didn't even know if he had survived. Daisy rolled over and checked her phone. 6:15 in the morning. Her shift didn't start until 8, but she couldn't stay in bed any longer. She got up quietly, careful not to wake Maria, her roommate who worked the evening shift. After a quick shower, Daisy pulled on her grey uniform dress and practical shoes. She twisted her dark hair into a neat bun, checking her reflection in the small mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but there was nothing she could do about those. The staff corridors were quiet this early. Daisy's footsteps echoed softly as she made her way to the service elevator. She knew she probably shouldn't go to the penthouse yet, but she needed to know if Mr. Cross was okay. When the elevator doors opened on the 80th floor, she heard voices. One was sharp and angry. "This is completely unacceptable." The voice belonged to a tall woman in an expensive suit who Daisy recognized as Carla Henson, Mr. Cross's assistant. "Do you have any idea what kind of boundaries you've crossed?" Daisy stepped out of the elevator, her heart pounding. "I'm sorry, I just wanted to check if—" "Check what?" Carla spun around, her eyes flashing. "If your little stunt worked, if you got enough attention." "No, Daisy's voice cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I was just trying to help. He couldn't breathe." "Carla." The quiet voice came from the doorway to the main living area. Adrian Cross stood there, looking pale and tired in silk pajamas and a dark robe. He leaned slightly against the doorframe, but his presence still commanded attention. "That's enough. Adrian, you should be resting," Carla protested, but her tone softened immediately. "I'm fine." He waved off her concern, his eyes fixed on Daisy. Thanks to her. Daisy couldn't read his expression. His face showed traces of the previous night's ordeal, the slight pallor, the careful way he held himself. But his eyes were alert and questioning. "I remember fragments," he said slowly. "Your voice. You were scared, but you stayed." He paused and something flickered across his face, pride warring with gratitude. "Thank you for doing what others wouldn't." Before Daisy could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Then again. And again. She pulled it out, confused by the sudden flood of notifications. "Oh, God," Carla muttered, looking at her own phone. "It's already trending." "What's trending?" Adrian asked sharply. But Daisy had already seen it. Someone had captured drone footage of the previous night, her giving Adrian rescue breaths through the penthouse windows. The headlines made her stomach churn. "Billionaire's Maid caught in late-night kiss." Cross-industry CEO in scandalous encounter with staff. She backed away toward the elevator, her cheeks burning. As she fled downstairs, she could hear voices in the lobby, including Mrs. Peterson from apartment 712 speaking loudly to her friend. "Did you see the video? Right there in the penthouse windows. I always said those maids were after more than just a paycheck." Daisy's hands shook as she pulled up the viral video on her phone. The footage was grainy but clear enough, her bent-over Adrian's still form, her mouth on his. Without context, without understanding the desperate situation, it looked wrong. The comments below were worse. Accusations, jokes, crude suggestions. Meanwhile, upstairs, Adrian was seeing the footage for the first time. His PR manager, Jonathan Walsh, had arrived moments after Daisy's departure. "The stock is already down 3 points," Jonathan reported grimly. "The optics are terrible, Adrian." A young maid, the penthouse at night. Adrian watched the clip again, his jaw tightening. The drone footage made it look tawdry, cheap. Everything that Daisy wasn't. He remembered her trembling hands, her quiet prayers as she tried to save him. Now her act of courage had been twisted into something shameful. "She saved my life," he said quietly. But Jonathan was already typing on his tablet, planning damage control. "We need to get ahead of this," Jonathan insisted. "Maybe spin it as a health scare, downplay the girl's involvement." "Her name is Daisy," Adrian cut in sharply. He walked to the window, the same window where the drone had captured that moment. The city sprawled below, grey and dreary in the morning light, while somewhere in his building a kind young woman was facing humiliation for doing the right thing. His chest still ached, but not from the cardiac event that had nearly claimed his life. This pain was different. The weight of knowing his position, his wealth, his very existence had turned someone's selfless act into public scandal. Carla stood nearby, her earlier anger replaced by concern. She watched Adrian's reflection in the window, saw the conflict in his face. "What do you want us to do?" she asked softly. Adrian pressed his forehead against the cool glass. The doctor had warned him to avoid stress, to rest and recover. But how could he rest knowing what Daisy was going through? The footage played again on Jonathan's tablet, and Adrian closed his eyes, remembering not the moment captured on camera, but the gentle voice that had anchored him in darkness. "Don't move. Please hold on. Help is coming." Now she was the one who needed help, and he was standing in his penthouse, watching her reputation crumble because she'd had the courage to save him. By evening, the situation outside Crossline Tower had become unbearable. A swarm of photographers and reporters crowded the entrance, their cameras flashing like lightning in the growing dusk. Security guards struggled to maintain order as the mob grew, all hoping to catch a glimpse of what the media had dubbed the billionaire's virgin temptress. Daisy huddled in the basement janitor's closet, her phone turned off after the 100th hateful message. The small space smelled of bleach and pine cleaner, but she found comfort in its familiar scents. Her world had shrunk to this tiny room where she could hide from the cruel headlines and judgment. "Sources say the Maid has a history in foster care," one reporter had announced. "Is this a calculated attempt to secure a wealthy benefactor?" The words made her stomach turn. She'd never felt so alone, so misunderstood. Even her few friends from church had sent concerned messages, asking if the stories were true. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she considered running away, but the thought brought fresh pain. Where would she go? The small room she rented before this job had already been filled. Her savings wouldn't last a week in New York City. The closet door creaked open, making her jump. "Miss Alvarez." It was Marcus, the head of security. "Mr. Cross has returned from the hospital. He's requesting all staff in the main lobby." Daisy's heart pounded as she followed Marcus upstairs. The lobby buzzed with activity. Security personnel, household staff, and Adrian's personal team all gathered in tense clusters. Through the tinted glass walls, she could see the media circus outside, their cameras still flashing. Adrian stood at the center of it all, looking remarkably composed for someone just released from the hospital. His suit was impeccable, but Daisy noticed he was paler than usual, with dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "This stops now," he announced, his voice carrying authority despite its tired edge. "I want the harassment of our staff ended immediately. Double the security detail. Anyone who doesn't have proper clearance doesn't get within 100 feet of this building." "But sir," Jonathan Walsh interjected, "the press is demanding a statement about a dedicated employee who saved my life." Adrian's tone could have frozen fire. "That's the only statement they're getting. Now clear them out." The lobby burst into action. Daisy slipped away in the chaos, retreating to her room to pack. She couldn't stay, couldn't bear bringing more trouble to this place. As evening deepened into night, she waited until the building grew quiet before wheeling her small suitcase to the private staff elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime, and her heart stopped. Adrian stood inside, his tie loosened, jacket gone. They stared at each other in surprise. "I'm so sorry," Daisy stammered, backing away. I didn't want to cause problems. I'll go quietly." "Where?" Adrian asked simply. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Adrian studied her for a long moment, noting her trembling hands and the dark smudges under her eyes that matched his own. "When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. Yesterday morning, I think." "Come upstairs," he said, holding the elevator door open. When she hesitated, he added softly, "Please, we should talk." The penthouse kitchen was warm and bright, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere below. Adrian moved with careful efficiency, pulling out bread, cheese, and fruit, while Daisy stood awkwardly by the counter. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a stool. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage sandwiches." The simple meal appeared before her: turkey and cheese on sourdough, apple slices, a glass of water. Daisy's eyes filled with tears at this unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she murmured, They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows where that fateful scene had played out just yesterday. Finally, Adrian spoke. "I owe you my life," he said quietly. "The doctors confirmed it. Without immediate intervention, I wouldn't have made it until the paramedics arrived." Daisy shook her head, pushing away praise she felt she didn't deserve. "I just did what anyone with a conscience would do. I couldn't just watch you die." To her astonishment, Adrian laughed, a soft, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. "When was the last time you read the news, Daisy? People walk past tragedy every day. They film it on their phones instead of helping. They choose likes and views over saving lives." He paused, his expression growing serious. "What you did wasn't common. It was extraordinary." Daisy stared at her half-eaten sandwich, unable to meet his intense gaze. "Now everything's ruined. Your reputation will survive," he interrupted firmly. "I'm more concerned about yours." He stood, walking to the window. "I've arranged for you to move to the private suite on this floor. It has its own entrance away from the photographers. You'll be safe here until this dies down." "I couldn't possibly—" "Please," he said, turning to face her. "Consider it repayment for saving my life." Later that night, lying in a bed more comfortable than any she'd ever known, Daisy listened to rain pattering against the windows. The sound reminded her of that first night, of desperate prayers whispered over a dying man. Had it all been random chance, or was there something more at work, some divine purpose that had placed her exactly where she needed to be? The rain continued its gentle rhythm, offering no answers but somehow bringing peace. In the darkness, Daisy closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for the luxury surrounding her, but for the simple blessing of being able to help another soul when it mattered most. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian's penthouse office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The city sprawled below, a maze of steel and glass catching the early sun. Adrian stood at his desk, reviewing documents when his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Cross, your lawyer, Mr. Patterson, is here for your 9 o'clock meeting." His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "Send him in," Adrian replied, straightening his tie. Thomas Patterson strode in, his grey suit as impeccable as always, but his expression was grim. He carried a thick leather briefcase that landed on Adrian's desk with a heavy thud. "We have a situation," Patterson said without preamble, pulling out a stack of legal documents. "Your sister-in-law Loretta is making moves against you." Adrian's jaw tightened. "What kind of moves?" "She's contesting your control of the family trust." Patterson spread several papers across the desk. "She's citing health negligence as grounds for removal, claims you're unfit to manage the empire your brother built." "Health negligence?" Adrian scoffed, but his hand unconsciously moved to his chest where the pain had struck just days ago. "The heart incident works in her favor," Patterson continued. "She's arguing that your refusal to maintain regular medical checkups and your workaholic tendencies demonstrate poor judgment." Adrian paced to the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. "I was saved, thanks to my new housekeeper, Daisy Alvarez. She performed CPR when I collapsed." A sharp laugh from the doorway made both men turn. Loretta Cross stood there, elegant in a black designer suit, her perfectly coiffed silver hair gleaming. She hadn't bothered to wait for an introduction. "Ah, yes, your little savior." Loretta's red lips curved into a cruel smile. "How convenient that she happened to be there at exactly the right moment. Have you considered, dear brother-in-law, that she might have triggered your heart failure?" Adrian's face darkened. "That's absurd, Loretta," Is it? She glided into the room, her heels clicking against the floor. A young, ambitious woman from nowhere suddenly playing hero to one of New York's wealthiest men? The timing seems suspicious. Get out. Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. Your brother would be devastated to see his legacy in such questionable hands. Loretta's words dripped with venom. I'm simply protecting what's rightfully ours. There is no ours, Loretta. Michael left the company to me. We'll see about that. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and do keep an eye on your little guardian angel. These immigrant types can be so opportunistic. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving a heavy silence. Patterson cleared his throat. We should discuss strategy. Later. Adrian cut him off. I need some air. Unknown to them, Daisy had been delivering fresh flowers to the adjacent room and had caught fragments of the heated exchange. Her hands trembled as she arranged white lilies in a crystal vase, Loretta's accusations echoing in her mind. Was she really making everything worse for Adrian? That afternoon, Adrian found her in her room, carefully folding her few possessions into her small suitcase. Going somewhere? His quiet voice made her jump. I'm causing too many problems, Daisy whispered, not meeting his eyes. Your sister-in-law is right. My presence here is making things complicated. Adrian crossed the room in 3 quick strides, gently taking the shirt from her hands and setting it aside. Loretta hasn't been right about anything since my brother died. But the company, your reputation, are not your concern. He sat down in a nearby chair, suddenly looking tired. Daisy, I want to make you an offer. She finally looked up, wary but curious. Let me pay for your education, he said. Any field you want to study, and I'll have my lawyers handle your immigration status, make everything official and permanent. Daisy's eyes widened. Mr. Cross, I couldn't… Adrian, he corrected softly. And yes, you could. You saved my life. This is the least I can do. I don't need payment for doing the right thing. Then consider it an investment in someone who still believes in doing the right thing. He paused, studying her face. Stay, at least for a week. Give me time to sort out this mess with Loretta and ensure your safety. Daisy twisted her hands in her lap, torn between gratitude and uncertainty. Finally, she nodded. 1 week. That evening, they shared dinner in the penthouse kitchen again. The city lights twinkled below as Adrian, somewhat to his own surprise, found himself talking about Michael. We were always competitive as kids, he said, pushing pasta around his plate. But there was respect there, love. After he died. He trailed off, remembering the funeral, the accusations, the bitter battle for control of the company. I saw how people changed when there was money involved. He continued. Friends became vultures. Family became strangers. Everything became about greed, about who could grab the biggest piece of the pie. Daisy listened quietly, her eyes full of compassion. When Adrian finally fell silent, she spoke softly. Sometimes God lets us break, so we remember who holds us. Adrian looked up, struck by the gentle wisdom in her words. For once in his life, he found himself completely speechless. The simple truth in her statement cut through years of cynicism and pain, touching something deep inside him that he thought had died with his brother. The city hummed below them, but in that moment, in the warm kitchen with its soft lights and shared confidences, Adrian felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Neither of them spoke for a long while, letting the weight of the moment settle around them like a comfortable blanket. Days melted together in the penthouse, like watercolors bleeding into each other. 1 week stretched into 10 days. and something subtle shifted in the air between Adrian and Daisy. The rigid formality that had marked their early interactions softened, replaced by a gentle rhythm of shared moments. Daisy found herself settling into a routine she'd never planned. Each morning, she'd arrive at the penthouse kitchen before sunrise, preparing simple but nourishing meals. The doctors had been strict about Adrian's diet after his heart incident, and she took their instructions seriously. "You don't have to do this," Adrian said one morning, watching her chop fresh vegetables for his breakfast omelette. "I can hire a professional chef." Daisy smiled, not looking up from her work. "Sometimes the simplest food feeds more than just the body, Mr. Cross." "Adrian," he corrected for what felt like the 100th time. And they both laughed. The physical therapist came 3 times a week, pushing Adrian through exercises to strengthen his heart. Daisy always stayed nearby, offering water or encouragement when needed. She noticed how Adrian's jaw would clench when the exercises became difficult, how his hands would grip the equipment a little tighter. "You're doing great," she'd say softly, and something in his eyes would ease. Between therapy sessions, they found themselves sharing more conversations. Adrian discovered Daisy had a quiet wit that could make him laugh unexpectedly. She learned he had a vast knowledge of architecture and could talk for hours about the history behind New York's famous buildings. "See that building there?" He'd point out his window. "They say it was built backward by mistake." "Really?" Daisy would lean closer to look, and Adrian would hide a smile at her genuine curiosity. The ease between them grew so naturally that the arrival of the legal summons felt like a bucket of ice water. Adrian's assistant brought it in one afternoon, her face tight with worry. "It's from Loretta's lawyers," she said, handing over the thick envelope. Adrian read it standing by his desk, his expression darkening with each page. Daisy, who had been arranging flowers nearby, saw his hands begin to shake. "What is it?" she asked softly. "They're claiming our—" He paused, searching for words. "Our situation violates corporate ethics. They're demanding my temporary suspension from the board." Daisy's heart sank. "Because I'm here? Because Loretta will use any weapon she can find." Adrian's voice was bitter. "And you're an easy target." The PR team arrived within the hour, filling the peaceful penthouse with urgent voices and clicking laptops. They huddled in Adrian's office while Daisy tried to make herself invisible, serving coffee and taking refuge in small tasks. "We need to control this narrative," the head of PR insisted. "Right now, the public sees either a scandal or a fairy tale. We need to make it the fairy tale." "What are you suggesting?" Adrian's voice was dangerous. "Announce an engagement. Frame this as a serious commitment, not a workplace indiscretion. The public loves a good love story, especially one with a humble heroine." The room fell silent. Through the glass walls, Daisy could see Adrian's face, tight with anger. "Absolutely not. I won't drag her through that circus." "Then you'll lose the company," someone said bluntly. "Loretta has public sympathy as the grieving widow. You need this." They argued for hours. Daisy moved through the penthouse like a ghost, her mind whirling. An engagement? The very thought made her hands shake as she folded fresh towels, straightened pillows, anything to keep busy. The sun was setting when Adrian finally found her in the small room she'd turned into a prayer corner. A simple cross hung on the wall, and her well-worn Bible lay open on a small table. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have to deal with any of this." Daisy turned to face him, her heart aching at the exhaustion in his eyes. "What will happen if you lose the company?" "Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Everything my brother and I built." He trailed off. "But I won't ask you to pretend—" "I'll do it," Daisy interrupted softly. Adrian stared at her. No. The media attention, the lies, the scandal. It would destroy your reputation. I'll take the shame if it keeps others safe. She echoed his earlier words back to him, adding, Sometimes God asks us to walk difficult paths for reasons we don't understand. That evening, Daisy spent hours on her knees in prayer. The small cross cast long shadows on the wall as she wrestled with her decision. Fear and peace warred in her heart, fear of the spotlight, of judgment, of failure. But underneath it all, a steady peace that this was the right choice. Morning came too quickly. Daisy's hands trembled as she dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton thing that suddenly seemed inadequate for the cameras waiting below. Adrian met her at the elevator, holding a small velvet box. We can still change our minds, he said quietly. Daisy shook her head. No, we can't. The ring was modest by billionaire standards, a single diamond set in white gold. Adrian had chosen it specifically because it matched Daisy's simple elegance. His hands were gentle as he slipped it onto her finger. Camera flashes exploded as they stepped outside. Adrian's arm was steady around her waist as he faced the press. Daisy tried to breathe normally, focusing on the warmth of his presence beside her. Miss Alvarez and I are happy to announce our engagement. Adrian's voice carried clearly over the shouted questions. Our relationship may seem unconventional to some, but love often arrives in unexpected ways. Daisy felt her cheeks flush at the word love. She knew it was part of the script, but something about the way Adrian said it made her heart skip. She looked up at him, and for a moment their eyes met. In that brief second, something shifted between them. Something that had nothing to do with pretense or public relations. The cameras caught that look, that moment. Later, the photos would show two people who appeared to be completely lost in each other's eyes, oblivious to the chaos around them. But only Daisy and Adrian knew the real truth of what had passed between them in that moment, the beginning of something neither had expected or planned for. As they turned to go back inside, Adrian's hand found hers, squeezing gently. In that quiet gesture was a promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Daisy's world transformed overnight. The simple routines that had anchored her life shifted into something entirely new, like stepping into a dream she couldn't quite believe was real. Her small staff quarters were exchanged for a luxurious suite next to Adrian's, though she kept her prayer corner in the old room as a reminder of who she truly was. The morning after their engagement announcement, she woke to find dozens of designer clothes hanging in her closet, Adrian's quiet way of helping her look the part. She ran her fingers over the soft fabrics, remembering the threadbare dresses of her foster care days. "Lord," she whispered, "help me stay humble in all this." Reporters camped outside the cross-line tower like hungry wolves. Every time Daisy and Adrian left the building, camera flashes exploded around them. She learned to smile through her nervousness, drawing strength from Adrian's steady presence beside her. "Just breathe," he would murmur, his hand warm against the small of her back. "They can't hurt you." The boardroom became her new challenge. Adrian insisted she attend his meetings, placing her in the chair beside his at the head of the long mahogany table. The first time, she felt the judgmental stares of the executives boring into her. "Mr. Cross," one of them said with barely concealed disdain, "is this appropriate?" Adrian's voice could have frozen water. "My fiancé's presence is not up for discussion." Daisy sat quietly, observing everything. She noticed when people were being dishonest, caught the subtle signs of stress in Adrian's jaw when deals weren't going well. During one particularly tense negotiation about a small hotel in Nebraska, she finally spoke up. "Those people need their jobs," she said softly. "The hotel might not be profitable now, but it's the heart of that community." The room fell silent. Adrian turned to her, something new in his eyes. "Go on." "In my hometown, when the mill closed, everything died. Families left, stores shut down, hope disappeared. Sometimes profit isn't just about money." Adrian studied her for a long moment, then turned back to his team. "Restructure the deal. We'll keep the hotel open." After that, he began asking for her opinion more often. Her simple wisdom, untainted by corporate greed, offered perspectives his Harvard-educated advisors never considered. She spoke for the housekeepers, the maintenance workers, the people whose lives were affected by every decision made in that gleaming boardroom. Their days fell into a rhythm. Breakfast together in the morning sun, meetings throughout the day, quiet dinners in the evening. Daisy still insisted on cooking sometimes, teaching Adrian's chef how to make her foster mother's chicken soup. The first time Adrian tasted it, his eyes closed in pleasure. "This reminds me of something," he said quietly. "I can't quite remember what." "Comfort," Daisy replied. "It reminds you of comfort." Before each meal, she would bow her head in prayer. At first, Adrian would watch her awkwardly, but gradually he began waiting for her to finish before picking up his fork. One day, she caught him mouthing the words "Amen" with her. In public, they played their roles perfectly. Their joined hands, the way Adrian would lean down to whisper in her ear, the soft smiles they shared, it all looked exactly like two people in love. But in private moments, when no cameras were watching, those same gestures continued. Neither mentioned it. The paparazzi spun stories about their romance, the billionaire and the maid, a modern Cinderella tale. Some articles were cruel, suggesting Daisy was a gold digger or worse. Those were the nights Adrian would find her in her prayer corner, tears on her cheeks. "They don't know you," he would say fiercely. "They don't know your heart." One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings and photographers, they retreated to Adrian's study. The room was his sanctuary, walls lined with books, leather chairs worn soft with use. Daisy curled up in what had become her usual spot, while Adrian queued up an old movie on the massive screen. The film was about a man who had lost his faith in everything until something extraordinary changed his life. As the story unfolded, Daisy watched Adrian more than the screen, noting how the muscles in his jaw tightened at certain scenes. "Do you believe in miracles?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Miracles ended when people started charging for them. Everything has a price tag now, even faith." Daisy turned fully toward him, her eyes gentle. "Then maybe you've just never seen one up close. Have you?" His tone was challenging, but there was something vulnerable beneath it. "I'm sitting here, aren't I?" She gestured around the luxurious room. A foster kid who used to pray for enough food to eat, now engaged to a billionaire because I happened to be in the right place at exactly the right moment to save his life. If that's not a miracle, what is? Adrian stared at her for a long moment before a reluctant smile tugged at his lips. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. The sound filled the room, chasing away the shadows of cynicism that usually lurked there. Daisy found herself laughing too, though she wasn't quite sure why. Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and something electric passed between them. The laughter faded into something softer, more intimate. For several heartbeats, neither looked away. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken words and possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. The warmth in Adrian's eyes made Daisy's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with their pretense of engagement. Finally, Adrian cleared his throat and turned back to the movie. but his hand reached across the space between them, finding hers in the dim light. Their fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably, as if they'd been doing this forever. They sat like that for the rest of the film, connected by that simple touch, while outside their window the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Neither mentioned the moment of connection, but both felt it, a shift in their carefully constructed arrangement, a warmth that was becoming harder to deny. The gleaming glass doors of Cross Enterprises headquarters swooshed open, welcoming Adrian and Daisy into the bustling lobby. Daisy's simple navy dress felt out of place among the sea of designer suits and clicking heels. Her fingers nervously smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. Adrian's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She managed a small nod, though her stomach was doing flips. The security guard tipped his hat, hiding a smile. As they crossed the marble floor, whispers followed like shadows. "That's her. The maid who saved him. Did you see the video? I heard she's just after his money. They say it's true love." Daisy kept her chin up, though her cheeks burned. Adrian guided her into a private elevator, his jaw tight with tension. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "They'll learn to respect you." The executive floor was all mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows. In the conference room, board members straightened as Adrian entered. Their curious gazes landed on Daisy, some kind, others calculating. "Please sit." Adrian gestured to the chair beside his at the head of the table. Daisy perched carefully, feeling like a sparrow among hawks. The meeting began, numbers and projections flowing across the massive screen. Daisy listened intently, taking mental notes. When discussion turned to community outreach programs, she couldn't help but lean forward slightly. Adrian noticed. "Daisy," he said suddenly, "you worked with several charitable organizations before, didn't you? What's your perspective on effective community engagement?" The room fell silent. Daisy's heart hammered, but she took a deep breath. "Well," she began softly, "in my experience, the most successful programs create genuine connections. It's not just about writing checks, it's about understanding what people really need." She spoke about her time volunteering at soup kitchens and literacy programs, about seeing how small changes could transform lives. Her voice grew stronger as she shared stories of real people she'd met, their struggles and triumphs. When she finished, Adrian was smiling proudly. "This is exactly the kind of insight we need," he announced to the room. "Daisy brings a unique perspective that's invaluable to our mission. Her intelligence and compassion will help shape our future initiatives." The atmosphere shifted. Board members who had been skeptical now looked thoughtful. Some even took notes. For the first time in her life, Daisy felt truly seen, not as a maid, not as Adrian's fiancée, but as herself. After the meeting, several executives approached to shake her hand. "We'd love your input on our youth program," one woman said warmly. "Your experience would be so helpful." That evening, Daisy's heart was full but restless. She needed to do something with her hands, something familiar and comforting. In the penthouse kitchen, she pulled out flour, sugar, and chocolate chips. "What are you up to?" Adrian asked, loosening his tie as he wandered in. "Making cookies for the security team," she replied, measuring ingredients with practiced ease. "They've been so kind keeping the photographers away. It's not much, but it's everything." Adrian finished softly, watching her work. The smell of baking cookies filled the apartment. When they were done, Daisy arranged them carefully in paper bags, each with a handwritten thank you note. She and Adrian rode down together to deliver them. The night shift guards were overwhelmed by the gesture. "Miss Alvarez, you didn't have to." one said gruffly, but his eyes crinkled with pleasure. "Please, call me Daisy," she insisted, passing out the still warm treats. Back upstairs, the city lights twinkled through the windows as Daisy made chamomile tea. Adrian sat heavily on the couch, looking troubled. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting his cup beside him. He was quiet for a long moment. "Today made me think about James, my brother." His voice was rough. "He used to say we needed more heart in the business. I never really understood what he meant until now." Daisy settled beside him, tucking her feet under her. "Tell me about him." He was the better one, always thinking of others, always believing the best in people. Adrian's hands tightened around his cup. "When he died, I lost more than my brother. I lost my faith. How could God let someone like James die while corrupt people prosper? How could he let children suffer in foster homes or go hungry on the streets?" His voice cracked slightly. "I stopped believing in anything except what I could control. Money, power, success. At least those things made sense." Daisy touched his arm gently. "I understand the anger," she said. "My childhood, there was so much pain. Foster homes where I felt invisible. Nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering why God had abandoned me." She traced the rim of her teacup thoughtfully. "But then I realized something. Every scar became a door where light got in. The lonely nights taught me to be kind to others who feel alone. The hunger made me generous when I had food to share. Even the worst moments shaped me into someone who could help others." Adrian stared at her, his expression raw with emotion. His chest felt tight, like something was breaking open inside him. "How do you still have such faith?" he whispered. "Because I choose to see the light, even in darkness," she replied simply. "And sometimes, when you least expect it, miracles happen." Later that night, after Daisy had gone to bed, Adrian sat alone in his study. On his tablet, the news was replaying that rainy night, the drone footage of Daisy kneeling beside his collapsed form, breathing life back into him. He watched her desperate determination, her complete disregard for her own safety or reputation. "Maybe she really is a miracle," he murmured to the empty room, his finger hovering over the image of the woman who had not only saved his life, but was slowly saving his heart as well. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade grey against the morning sky. Daisy's hands trembled as she smoothed her simple navy dress, the most professional outfit she owned. Adrian stood beside her, his jaw set with determination. "Ready?" he asked softly, offering his arm. She nodded, unable to find her voice. Camera flashes exploded around them as they climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, the polished marble halls echoed with their footsteps. The courtroom was already packed when they entered. Loretta sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly coiffed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Daisy earned in a year. Her lawyer, Maxwell Warner, looked equally expensive in his tailored suit. Daisy slipped into a bench directly behind Adrian's table, folding her hands in her lap to hide their shaking. She could feel the weight of judgmental stares pressing down on her. Warner stood, adjusting his silk tie. "Your Honor, we're here today because Mr. Cross has demonstrated a concerning pattern of behavior that puts the company's interests at risk. His recent entanglement with a domestic employee raises serious questions about his judgment." He gestured toward Daisy dismissively. "This woman, this maid, has obviously orchestrated a calculated seduction of a vulnerable man. First, she conveniently saves his life in a highly theatrical manner. Then she manipulates her way into his home and his confidence. Now she's supposedly engaged to one of New York's wealthiest men. The pattern is clear." Daisy's cheeks burned. She stared at her lap, willing herself not to cry as Warner continued his character assassination. Furthermore, we have evidence suggesting Miss Alvarez may have actually triggered Mr. Cross's cardiac event. The timing is suspiciously convenient. We believe this was a premeditated attempt to gain control over both Mr. Cross and, by extension, the Cross family fortune. Loretta nodded smugly from her seat, her perfect makeup unable to hide the bitterness in her eyes. "This is absurd," Adrian's lawyer objected, but Warner was building steam. "Look at her background. A string of foster homes, no family connections, barely a high school education. Are we really supposed to believe this is a genuine relationship? Or is it more likely she saw an opportunity and seized it, regardless of the damage to the company's reputation or Mr. Cross's well-being?" Daisy's vision blurred with unshed tears. Each word felt like a physical blow, stripping away her dignity. She wanted to disappear, to run from the whispers and stares, but she forced herself to sit still, remembering her silent prayers for strength. The judge turned to Adrian's table. "Mr. Cross, would you like to address these allegations?" Adrian stood slowly, his broad shoulders straight. Instead of facing the judge, he turned to look directly at Daisy. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted in his expression. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "I've spent 20 years building my company's success. I've made billions of dollars, acquired countless properties, and earned a reputation for being coldly efficient. But 3 weeks ago, I was dying on my penthouse floor." He paused, his hands gripping the table. "My wealth meant nothing. My power meant nothing. I was alone, unable to breathe, my heart failing. And the only person who stopped to help, who risked everything to save a stranger, was Daisy Alvarez." The room was absolutely silent now. Even Warner had stopped shuffling his papers. "She didn't know who I was. She didn't care about my money or my status. She saw someone in need and acted with pure compassion." Adrian's voice grew stronger, filled with emotion. "Since that night, I've watched her face cruel gossip and harassment with grace. I've seen her show kindness to the very people who mock her. She's transformed my home from a cold showpiece into a place of warmth and life." He turned to face the judge directly. "They claim she manipulated me for money? She tried to leave twice, afraid her presence was causing problems. They say she seduced me. She blushes when I hold her hand in public. Every accusation they've made reveals more about their own greed and cynicism than about Daisy's character." Loretta's face had turned an ugly shade of red. Warner tried to interrupt, but Adrian raised his voice slightly. "The truth is, Daisy didn't save my money. She didn't save my reputation or my company. She saved my soul." The words rang through the courtroom, causing audible gasps. "She reminded me what it means to be human, to have faith, to care about something bigger than profit margins. If that makes me unfit to run my company in some people's eyes, so be it. I'd rather be the man I am becoming with her than the man I was without her." He sat down amid stunned silence. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. "I've heard enough. This case is dismissed. Mr. Cross's position remains secure, and I strongly advise the plaintiff to reconsider any further legal action." Loretta stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floor. Cameras flashed wildly as Adrian and Daisy left the courthouse hand in hand, his grip warm and steady around her trembling fingers. Back at the penthouse that evening, Daisy stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Her reflection showed eyes still red from crying, though these were different tears than the ones she'd fought in court. "You didn't have to say those things," she whispered as Adrian approached. I'm just a maid who tried to help. I don't deserve such praise." Adrian moved closer, his hand finding hers in the dim light. "You're more than that," he said softly. "You're so much more than that. Their eyes met in the window's reflection. Neither spoke, but something profound passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too deep for words, too precious to risk naming just yet. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching night settle over the city, their joined hands saying everything their hearts weren't ready to voice. 2 nights after the court hearing, the grand ballroom of the Crossline Tower sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant flower arrangements. The charity gala, organized to support medical aid for the homeless, drew hundreds of New York's elite. Every detail had been carefully planned to restore Adrian's reputation and showcase his commitment to giving back. Daisy stood in front of her bedroom mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The borrowed gown, a deep blue silk that flowed like water, made her feel like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Her dark hair had been styled into soft waves, and tiny diamond earrings caught the light when she moved. She touched the simple cross necklace at her throat, the one piece that was truly hers. A gentle knock at the door made her turn. "Come in," she called softly. Adrian stepped inside, looking distinguished in his black tuxedo. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes widening slightly. "You look—" He paused, searching for words. "Beautiful doesn't seem adequate." Daisy felt her cheeks warm. "The stylist you hired worked magic," she said, smoothing the dress nervously. "I hope I don't embarrass you tonight." "That would be impossible," Adrian said firmly. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Are you ready?" She nodded, though her stomach was full of butterflies. Together they made their way to the elevator and descended to the ballroom level. The massive doors opened to a sea of faces. Conversations hushed momentarily as heads turned to watch them enter. Daisy felt Adrian's hand settle protectively at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. "Mr. Cross! Adrian!" Voices called from all directions. Everyone wanted a moment with him, to discuss business or offer congratulations on winning the lawsuit. Daisy watched in quiet amazement as Adrian handled each interaction with grace and authority. She noticed how different he seemed from the man she'd first met. The cold mask he'd worn then had softened into something warmer, more genuine. When he introduced her to people, his voice held unmistakable pride. After an hour of mingling, it was time for Adrian's speech. He squeezed her hand before stepping up to the podium. The room fell silent as he adjusted the microphone. "Good evening," he began, his voice strong and clear. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We've gathered to support a cause that's become deeply personal to me, ensuring medical care reaches those who need it most." He paused, his eyes finding Daisy in the crowd. 3 weeks ago I experienced firsthand what it means to be completely helpless. Despite all my resources, I found myself alone and dying. In that moment, wealth meant nothing, status meant nothing. What saved me was something money can't buy, pure compassion from someone who had every reason to walk away. The audience was completely still, hanging on his words. The woman who saved me reminded me that compassion is the world's rarest currency. It can't be earned or demanded. It can only be freely given, often by those who seem to have the least to spare. Daisy felt tears gathering in her eyes. The emotion in Adrian's voice was raw and real. "Tonight, as we raise funds for medical aid, I ask you to remember this. Every person deserves care, regardless of their circumstances. Every life has value, and sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected sources." The applause was thunderous, but Daisy barely heard it. Her heart felt too full, the emotions too overwhelming. She slipped away from the crowd, seeking refuge on the garden balcony. The cool night air helped calm her racing thoughts. New York's lights sparkled below like fallen stars. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she remembered that first night. How terrified she'd been, how desperate to help. She heard footsteps behind her and quickly tried to wipe her face. "Daisy?" Adrian's voice was gentle. "Why did you leave?" She turned, attempting a smile. "Your speech was beautiful. I just needed some air." He stepped closer, concern in his eyes. "You're crying." "Happy tears," she assured him. "I never imagined—" She stopped as Adrian suddenly grimaced, his hand going to his chest. "Adrian!" His face had gone pale. He stumbled forward, reaching for the balcony railing and missing. "No," Daisy whispered, horror flooding through her as she recognized what was happening. She lunged forward just as his legs gave out, helping break his fall. "Help!" she screamed toward the ballroom. "Somebody help us!" Adrian's breathing was labored, his eyes wide with fear. Daisy knelt beside him, her borrowed gown spreading around her like spilled ink. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice shaking but determined. "Please, don't move." She tilted his head back, checking his airway just as she had that first night. Her hands trembled as she started compressions, counting under her breath. Behind her she could hear gasps and screams as people discovered them. "Someone call 911!" she heard someone shout. Daisy blocked everything out except Adrian's face and her own movements. Compress, breathe, compress, breathe. Time seemed to stretch endlessly until she finally heard sirens approaching. The paramedics had to gently pull her away. She stood on shaking legs, her elegant gown now wrinkled and tear-stained, as they loaded Adrian onto a stretcher. Phones were recording everything, but for once she didn't care about the cameras. Hours later, in the hospital waiting room, someone turned on the news. Footage from the gala was already airing. But this time, there was no scandal, no sensational headlines about the billionaire and his maid. Instead, the world witnessed what real love looked like. A woman in a blue silk gown, fighting with everything she had to save the man she loved. Not once, but twice. The reporters' voices were respectful, almost awed as they described the scene. "In an age of cynicism," one commentator said, "tonight we saw something genuine and profound. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or fancy words. Sometimes it's about being there when it matters most, doing whatever it takes to keep someone alive." Daisy barely heard them. Her eyes remained fixed on the emergency room doors, her lips moving in silent prayer, waiting for news about Adrian. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors. Daisy sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hand gently holding Adrian's. Dark circles shadowed her eyes after 2 sleepless nights, but she refused to leave. Nurses had brought her blankets and offered to find her a cot, but she preferred staying alert, watching every rise and fall of his chest. "Would you like some coffee, dear?" a kind-faced nurse named Margaret asked, poking her head in. Daisy managed a tired smile. "No, thank you. I'm just praying." The nurse nodded sympathetically before leaving. Daisy returned to her whispered prayers, her rosary beads warm in her free hand. The doctors said Adrian was stable, that his heart hadn't sustained permanent damage. But seeing him so still frightened her. The mighty Adrian Cross, usually so commanding and alive, looked vulnerable against the white hospital sheets. Through the window she could see photographers camping outside the hospital entrance. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching towards the sky like metal flowers. The story had captured the public's imagination. The billionaire saved twice by the same woman, their fake engagement possibly turning real. But Daisy barely registered the circus anymore. Her world had shrunk to this room, to the rhythm of Adrian's breathing and the warmth of his hand in hers. She dozed fitfully in the chair, starting awake at every change in the monitor's beeping. During the long night hours, she talked to him softly, sharing memories of her childhood in foster homes, her dreams of helping others, her growing feelings for him. "God brought me to you for a reason," she whispered. "Please come back to us." On the second day, while rain streaked the windows, Daisy felt a slight pressure on her hand. Her eyes flew open to find Adrian watching her, his gaze tired but clear. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Tears spilled down Daisy's cheeks as she squeezed his hand. "Of course I stayed." "How long?" "2 days." She reached for the water cup with a straw. "Small sips." He drank carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. "You look exhausted," says the man who just woke up from a 2-day nap. She tried to joke, but her voice cracked. Adrian's fingers tightened around hers. "Thank you." "Again." "Shh," she soothed. "Just rest." He drifted back to sleep, but this time his face was peaceful. Daisy sat back in her chair, overwhelmed with relief and clarity. Watching him sleep, she knew what she had to do. The media attention would only intensify now. There would be endless speculation about their relationship, invasive questions about their future. The scandal would overshadow Adrian's charity work and business reputation. And Daisy, with her simple faith and humble background, would always be seen as an fortune hunter who didn't belong in his world. That evening, while Adrian slept deeply, Daisy wrote a letter with trembling hands. "Dearest Adrian, you needed a miracle. I was only the messenger. God placed me in your path twice to help you survive, but now it's time for you to truly live. Your heart is stronger than you know, both the physical one and the one you've kept hidden for so long. The world needs your compassion and vision. Please don't let my presence in your life become a distraction from the important work you're meant to do. Know that somewhere I'll be praying for you always. With love, Daisy." She folded the paper carefully and placed it on his bedside table, next to his reading glasses. For a long moment, she stood watching him breathe, memorizing the lines of his face and the way his eyelashes rested against his cheeks. "Goodbye," she whispered, touching his hand one last time. The night nurse gave her a concerned look as she left with her small suitcase, but Daisy managed a brave smile. "He's sleeping peacefully. I'll be back tomorrow." Outside, she ducked her head against the photographer's flashes and walked quickly to the bus station. Her hands shook as she purchased a ticket to Maplebrook, a small town she'd read about in a magazine, quiet, friendly, far from the glamour and pressure of New York City. The last passengers were boarding when she arrived at the terminal. She took a window seat near the back, clutching her bag close. As the bus pulled away from the station, the city lights began to blur behind her. The majestic silhouette of Cross Line Tower stood against the night sky, a monument to the life she was leaving behind. "Watch over him," she prayed softly, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. "Help him understand." Dawn was breaking when Adrian woke fully. His mind felt clearer, his chest less tight. But something was wrong. The chair beside his bed was empty, the blanket Daisy had used neatly folded. "Nurse!" he called out, his voice stronger. "Where's Miss Alvarez?" The nurse avoided his eyes as she checked his vitals. "She left last night, sir. Said she'd be back today." Adrian knew instantly that wasn't true. His gaze fell on the folded paper by his glasses. With shaking hands, he opened the letter and read Daisy's words. For the first time since his brother's death, tears filled his eyes and spilled unchecked down his face. "Sir." The nurse touched his shoulder, concerned. "Are you in pain? Should I call the doctor?" But Adrian couldn't speak. The ache in his chest had nothing to do with his heart condition. He clutched Daisy's letter, his tears falling onto the paper where she'd signed her name with a small cross beside it. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the empty chair where she had kept her faithful vigil. Outside, reporters were already gathering, eager for updates on his condition. But inside the quiet hospital room, a broken man wept for the second miracle he'd lost. Not the saving of his life, but the woman who had awakened his heart. The autumn leaves in Maplebrook painted the small town in shades of gold and crimson as Daisy adjusted to her new life. Her tiny attic apartment above May's diner wasn't much, just a bed, a dresser, and a rickety table beneath a slanted ceiling. But it felt safe. Each morning she would wake before sunrise to the scent of fresh coffee and bacon wafting up from below. "Morning, sunshine!" May, the 65-year-old diner owner, would call out as Daisy descended the narrow stairs. The older woman had taken one look at Daisy's worn suitcase and gentle eyes 3 weeks ago and offered her both a job and a home. Today, like every day, Daisy tied on her blue apron and got to work. The regular customers never questioned why such a young woman would choose their sleepy town over New York City. They just appreciated her warm smile and the way she remembered their usual orders. "More coffee, Mr. Peterson?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "You're an angel, Daisy," the elderly man replied, pushing his cup forward. "My Eleanor used to say the same thing, that angels walk among us disguised as ordinary folks." Daisy's hands trembled slightly at his words, remembering another man who'd once looked at her with such gratitude. She pushed the memory away and focused on refilling cups, wiping tables, and keeping busy. After her shift, she would walk the 3 blocks to Hope Community Church, a modest white building with peeling paint and a crooked steeple. Pastor Mike and his wife Sarah had welcomed her immediately, asking no questions about her past. "The Lord knows your heart," Sarah had said simply, hugging Daisy on her first Sunday there. "That's all that matters to us." In the quiet of the church, Daisy would sit in the last pew and write in her journal. The pages filled quickly with her neat handwriting. "Dear God, thank you for peace, for the sound of leaves crunching under my feet instead of camera shutters, for the ability to help others without judgment or speculation." The women's shelter became her sanctuary. Located in an old Victorian house on Maple Street, the Maplebrook shelter housed mothers and children escaping difficult situations. Daisy recognized the look in their eyes. She'd seen it in the mirror during her own foster care days. Using the money Adrian had insisted on giving her before the gala, she bought winter coats for the children. Simple, warm jackets in bright colors that made the kids smile. She never told anyone where the money came from. "You're a blessing," Maria, one of the shelter residents, said as her 5-year-old daughter twirled in her new purple coat. "How did you know we needed these?" Daisy just smiled. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Meanwhile, in New York, Adrian Cross stood at his penthouse window, watching the city lights blur through the autumn rain. His physical recovery had been steady. The doctors called it remarkable, but his spirit remained restless. The media had eventually tired of speculating about Daisy's disappearance. His PR team had crafted a statement about an amicable parting and respect for privacy. But Adrian couldn't let go. In his private study, a team of investigators provided weekly updates. They were discreet, professional, and thorough, qualities that usually impressed Adrian. But their efficiency in tracking Daisy made his chest ache with guilt. "She's working at a diner in Maplebrook," Thompson, his head investigator, reported. "Living quietly, attending church, volunteering at a local shelter." Adrian's fingers traced the edge of his desk. "The shelter. Tell me more." "The Maplebrook Women's Shelter. They're struggling financially. Miss Alvarez started a prayer circle there, meeting twice weekly with residents. She's been using her savings to help with immediate needs." That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Daisy's face as she'd prayed by his hospital bed, her faith unwavering even when his own had crumbled. Making his decision, he contacted his lawyer the next morning. I want to set up an anonymous donation," he instructed. $3 million to the Maplebrook Women's Shelter. Route it through the Cross Foundation's charitable trust, but ensure my name stays completely hidden." His lawyer raised an eyebrow, but asked no questions. Within days, the shelter's director received notice of the generous grant. Daisy was serving coffee at the diner when she heard the news. Sarah burst through the door, waving a letter and crying with joy. "It's a miracle!" she exclaimed, hugging Daisy tight. "Someone donated $3 million to the shelter. We can repair the roof, hire full-time counselors, expand the children's program, everything we've been praying for." That evening, Daisy knelt beside her bed, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. "Thank you for showing these women they're not forgotten." Her journal entry that night was simple. "Today I witnessed a miracle. Not the dramatic kind that makes headlines, but the quiet kind that reminds us God is always working, even when we can't see His hands." In his penthouse, Adrian watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of Daisy's smile. His anonymous gift had brought him no peace, only a deeper longing for the woman who had taught him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars. He picked up the letter she'd left in the hospital, now worn from frequent reading. Her words about being only the messenger seemed to mock him. She'd been so much more than that. She'd been the miracle itself. The city hummed below, its rhythm unchanged by his inner turmoil. Somewhere in a small town, Daisy was probably serving coffee or praying with troubled women, unaware that her gentle influence had inspired a billionaire to give away millions. Adrian touched the window glass, cool against his fingertips. "You were wrong, Daisy," he whispered. "You weren't just the messenger, you were the message." As autumn deepened into winter, their separate lives continued, one in a gleaming tower above Manhattan, the other in a humble attic above a small-town diner. But they were connected by invisible threads of grace, charity, and unspoken love that neither time nor distance could sever. In Maplebrook, Daisy continued to write in her journal each night, finding peace in the simple act of recording her thoughts and prayers. She never suspected that the mysterious donation that had transformed the shelter's future had come from the man whose life she'd saved twice. Instead, she simply thanked God for answering prayers in His own perfect way. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear in Maplebrook, painting the small town's maple trees in brilliant shades of red and gold. Adrian Cross adjusted his worn flannel shirt, feeling strangely vulnerable without his usual tailored suit. He'd chosen simple jeans, work boots, and a baseball cap, clothing that would blend in with the local crowd rather than scream, "New York billionaire." His rental car, a modest sedan instead of his usual luxury vehicle, was parked around the corner from Maid's diner. The establishment's windows gleamed in the morning light, its neon "open" sign flickering lazily. Through the glass, he could see the breakfast rush in full swing. Adrian's heart thundered in his chest. After weeks of careful planning, fabricating a story about surveying land for potential development, he was finally here. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed open the door, setting off a cheerful bell chime. The diner smelled of coffee, bacon, and fresh-baked pie, homey scents that were worlds away from his penthouse's sterile atmosphere. Country music played softly from an old jukebox in the corner. Regular customers filled the booths, their conversations creating a warm backdrop of small-town life. And there she was. Daisy moved between tables with practiced ease, coffee pot in hand, wearing a simple blue uniform dress with a white apron. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and she was smiling, really smiling, as she topped off her elderly customer's cup. She looked at peace. Adrian slid onto a stool at the counter, keeping his head down. He watched as she laughed at something a trucker said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She seemed lighter here, unburdened by the weight of scandal and expectations that had followed her in New York. "Coffee, sir?" she asked, approaching with her pot. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. He looked up slowly, meeting her gaze. The coffee pot slipped from Daisy's hands, crashing to the floor. Hot liquid splashed across the linoleum as she stared at him, her face draining of color. "Adrian," she whispered, the name barely audible. He managed a faint smile. "It's just me now." The diner's buzz faded to background noise as they looked at each other. Daisy gripped the counter for support, her knuckles white. 1,000 emotions flickered across her face: shock, joy, fear, confusion. "Oh my goodness, Daisy!" May, the diner's owner, rushed over with a mop. "Are you all right, honey?" Daisy blinked rapidly, coming back to herself. "I'm so sorry, May. I'll clean this up right away." "Take your lunch break early," May said kindly, noting Daisy's shaken expression. "I've got this." Adrian stood. "There's a park across the street. Would you join me?" Daisy nodded mutely. She untied her apron with trembling fingers and followed him outside. The autumn air was cool against their faces as they crossed the street to a small town square. They found a bench beneath a blazing maple tree, its leaves creating a canopy of gold above them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Adrian studied her profile, noting the subtle changes since he'd last seen her. She looked healthier, more grounded. The constant tension she'd carried in New York had melted away. "How did you find me?" Daisy finally asked, her voice soft. "I hired investigators," Adrian admitted. "I needed to know you were safe." She turned to face him. "The shelter donation. That was you, wasn't it?" He nodded, watching a leaf spiral down between them. "I saw how much good you were doing here. I wanted to help, but I knew you wouldn't accept it directly from me." "Thank you," she said simply. "Those women and children, the money has changed their lives." "You changed mine," Adrian replied quietly. Daisy's eyes filled with tears. "I ran away. I was a coward." "No." Adrian shook his head. "You were brave. You chose peace over chaos, simplicity over wealth. You taught me what courage really looks like." They sat in comfortable silence, watching children play in the fallen leaves. Finally, Daisy spoke again. "How are you? Your heart?" "Fully healed." Adrian smiled. "The doctors say it's stronger than ever." "And the lawsuit?" "Dismissed. Loretta accepted a settlement and moved to Europe." He paused. "But that's not why I'm here." Daisy's hands twisted in her lap. "Why are you here, Adrian?" He turned to face her fully, his expression gentle. "I won't ask you to come back. I can see you've built a life here, a good life. I needed to see you safe, to know you found what you were looking for." "Have you?" she asked softly. "Found what you were looking for?" Adrian's gaze swept across the small town square, taking in the historic buildings, the friendly faces, the sense of community that permeated everything. "I'm learning," he said. "You taught me about faith, not just in God, but in people's capacity for kindness. I'm trying to carry that lesson forward." Daisy smiled through her tears. "You were always kind, Adrian. You just forgot how to show it." The church bells chimed 1 o'clock, startling them both. Daisy stood reluctantly. "I should get back to work." Adrian rose as well, his hands deep in his pockets. "Of course." They walked back to the diner in companionable silence. At the door, Daisy hesitated. Will you stay in town long?" "Just today," Adrian replied. "I have meetings in New York tomorrow." She nodded, understanding. This wasn't meant to be a long reunion, just a moment of closure, of gentle acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Adrian's smile was tender. "No, Daisy, thank you. For saving my life, in more ways than one." He watched as she disappeared back into the diner, the bell chiming softly behind her. Through the window, he saw her pick up her coffee pot again, moving between tables with that same peaceful smile. She belonged here. He realized. In this small town with its big heart, she had found her purpose. The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees as Adrian walked back to his rental car. He felt lighter, somehow, as if seeing Daisy happy and content had lifted a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. The maple trees of Maplebrook shed their golden leaves as autumn deepened into winter. Despite his meetings in New York, Adrian found reasons to stay. Each morning, he'd walk into town from his rented cottage, stopping at the shelter before most volunteers arrived. Sarah, the shelter coordinator, found him early Monday morning fixing a broken cabinet hinge. "Mr. Cross, you really don't have to—" "Please," he smiled, "just Adrian." He wiped sawdust from his hands. "And I want to help." Throughout the week, Adrian settled into a routine far removed from his corporate life. He drove his pickup truck, purchased locally to avoid attention, to collect food donations from grocery stores. The loading dock workers never suspected the man in work boots and flannel was a billionaire. On Tuesday, he spent hours repairing a rickety dining table where shelter families gathered for meals. Children perched on nearby chairs, watching him work. "Can I help?" asked Tommy, a 7-year-old staying at the shelter with his mum. Adrian handed him a small sander. "Very gently, like this." He guided the boy's hands, showing him how to smooth the rough spots. From the kitchen doorway, Daisy watched silently, her heart full. The Adrian she'd known in New York, isolated in his penthouse, suspicious of everyone, seemed like a different person entirely. Wednesday brought a delivery of winter coats. Adrian organized the teenagers from the local church youth group to sort sizes and colors. His natural leadership emerged, but softer now, encouraging rather than commanding. "You're good with them," Daisy said quietly, bringing him coffee. Adrian accepted the cup gratefully. "They remind me of myself at that age, before money complicated everything." Thursday afternoon, he taught 3 shelter residents basic computer skills, helping them create resumes. His patience never wavered as they struggled with the unfamiliar technology. "I never thought I'd be good at this," Martha, a grandmother starting over, said tearfully. "You're stronger than you know," Adrian replied, his voice gentle. "Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us first." Daisy, organizing donated books nearby, felt tears prick her eyes at his words. On Friday, Adrian spent hours in the shelter's small kitchen, learning from Eleanor, an elderly volunteer, how to make her famous chicken soup. His corporate precision translated surprisingly well to measuring ingredients. "The secret," Eleanor confided, "is cooking with love." Adrian laughed, a free, genuine sound that made Daisy pause in the hallway. "I'm learning about that too." Saturday brought the weekly community supper, where shelter residents and volunteers shared meals together. Adrian stood at the serving line, ladling Eleanor's soup with careful attention. Each person received not just food, but eye contact, a smile, a moment of genuine connection. Daisy moved through the crowded room, refilling water glasses. She couldn't help noticing how naturally Adrian fit into this simple environment. His designer suits and boardroom manner had been replaced by something authentic and warm. As the evening wound down, they found themselves cleaning up together. Adrian washed dishes while Daisy dried them, falling into an easy rhythm. "The soup was wonderful," she said softly. "Eleanor's a good teacher." He passed her a clean bowl. though I think she suspects I'm not just a random volunteer. The whole town's curious about you, Daisy admitted. They wonder why a stranger would spend so much time helping. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his hands still in the soapy water. Because it feels right, he finally said. For the first time in years, I'm doing something that matters. After everything was cleaned and put away, they stepped out into the crisp evening air. The street was quiet, shops closed for the night. Without discussing it, they began walking together toward the residential area where Daisy's apartment sat above the diner. I need to tell you something, Adrian said as they passed the town square. About the shelter's funding. Daisy's steps slowed. I already know it was you. Not just the recent donation. He stopped walking, turning to face her. I've arranged for ongoing support, enough to expand the programs, hire full-time staff, maybe even open a second location. Tears spilled down Daisy's cheeks. You didn't have to do that. I did. Adrian's voice was soft but firm. Because you showed me what giving really means. It's not about writing checks from a distance. It's about being present, seeing people's needs, offering whatever you have, whether that's money or time or just yourself. The first snowflakes of the season began drifting down, catching in Daisy's dark hair. She looked up at Adrian, seeing in his eyes all the changes these quiet days of service had wrought. Without words, they moved toward each other. The hug was long and tear-filled, speaking volumes neither was ready to voice. Adrian's arms were strong and sure around her, while Daisy's fingers clutched the back of his coat. The snow fell silently around them, dusting their shoulders with white. Streetlights cast a gentle glow, turning the moment into something magical and suspended in time. They held each other, acknowledging without words how far they'd both come from that rainy night in New York when their paths first crossed. When they finally stepped apart, their eyes met with shared understanding. There was more to say, more to feel, more to discover. But for now, this moment, this recognition of how deeply they'd changed each other, was enough. They walked the rest of the way to Daisy's apartment in comfortable silence, their footprints leaving parallel tracks in the thin layer of snow. At her door, they exchanged simple goodnights, both knowing tomorrow would bring another day of shared purpose in their quiet corner of the world. Snow blanketed Maplebrook on Christmas Eve, transforming the small town into a winter wonderland. White flakes drifted lazily past the stained glass windows of St. Andrew's Church, where warmth and anticipation filled the air. Inside, evergreen garlands and red ribbons decorated the wooden pews. Dozens of candles flickered in brass holders, casting a gentle glow across the faces of townspeople dressed in their holiday best. The old church had never looked more beautiful, its simple decorations reflecting the humble spirit of the community. Daisy stood with the volunteer choir in their burgundy robes, her hands clasped loosely before her. Her dark hair was swept back from her face, and her eyes shone with joy as she surveyed the gathered congregation. Many were residents and volunteers from the shelter, including Eleanor, who beamed from the front row. The service progressed through familiar carols and readings. Children fidgeted excitedly in their seats, their parents gently shushing them. The atmosphere grew more peaceful with each passing moment, as if the outside world had faded away, leaving only this sacred space. Near the end of the service came the moment for Silent Night. As the piano played the opening notes, Daisy stepped forward to lead the choir. Her clear voice rose pure and strong in the first verse. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. The congregation joined in softly, their voices blending in harmony. Candlelight flickered across faces peaceful with wonder, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Daisy felt her heart expand with gratitude for this simple moment of grace. Unknown to her, at the back of the church, Adrian stood in shadow. He wore a dark wool coat, his face reflecting both nervousness and determination. As the second verse began, he took a deep breath and started walking slowly down the center aisle. "Silent night, holy night, shepherds quake at the sight." A few heads turned to watch his progress, but most remained focused on the choir. Daisy, lost in the music, didn't notice his approach. Her voice continued leading the congregation through the familiar words, "Glory streams from heaven afar, heavenly hosts sing Alleluia." As the final verse began, Adrian reached the front of the church. The soft glow of hundreds of candles illuminated his face as he moved to stand before Daisy. Her voice faltered slightly when she saw him, but she maintained her composure, finishing the verse, "Christ the Saviour is born, Christ the Saviour is born." The last note faded into reverent silence. Before anyone could move or speak, Adrian slowly lowered himself to one knee. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Daisy's eyes widened, her hand flying to her throat. "You told me not to move that night," Adrian said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. "When you found me dying on my penthouse floor, you whispered those words and saved my life." He paused, drawing a shaky breath. "Now I'm asking you not to run." Tears began streaming down Daisy's cheeks. The choir behind her stood perfectly still, barely breathing. "That night, you gave me back my heartbeat?" Adrian continued, his own eyes growing wet. "But in the weeks since then, you've given me back so much more. You showed me what real faith looks like. Not in grand gestures or empty words, but in simple acts of kindness and courage." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Marry me," he said softly. "Not for my name or my wealth, but for the faith you gave me back. Marry me because somehow God used you to teach me how to live again." The church was absolutely silent. Every face was turned toward them, every heart seemed to beat in suspense. Daisy stood trembling, tears streaming freely down her face as she looked down at Adrian. Finally, still shaking, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The church erupted in spontaneous applause and crying. Several people jumped to their feet, including Eleanor, who was sobbing openly into her handkerchief. The choir broke ranks, gathering around them in celebration. Adrian stood and pulled Daisy into his arms. They embraced tightly as the applause continued around them, both of them crying freely now. The candlelight caught the tears on their faces, making them shimmer like stars. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I think I've loved you since that first night." "I love you too," she answered softly. God knew what he was doing all along. They held each other in the warm glow of hundreds of candles, surrounded by the joy and tears of their community. The simple church, with its evergreen garlands and wooden pews, had become the setting for their miracle. Outside, snow continued to fall silently, adding its own blessing to the holy night. The minister stepped forward, raising his hands for quiet. When the congregation settled, he led them in a prayer of blessing for the newly engaged couple. Daisy and Adrian stood hand in hand, their faces radiant in the soft light of grace, as the community that had become their family surrounded them with love. In that moment, they both knew that their journey, which had begun with a desperate rescue on a stormy night, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Under the gentle glow of Christmas Eve candlelight, their separate paths had finally merged into one. The Christmas morning sun painted Maplebrook's snow-covered streets in soft, golden light. Church bells rang out across the quiet town, their joyful peals echoing off old brick buildings and drawing townsfolk from their homes, despite the early hour. Inside the small church, evergreen garlands and white ribbons adorned the wooden pews. Candlelight flickered from simple brass holders, dancing across the faces of gathered neighbors, shelter residents, and diner regulars who had become like family to Daisy over these past months. Eleanor from the shelter dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief as she arranged white roses at the altar. "Never seen a Christmas wedding before," she whispered to Martha, the diner owner. "But somehow it feels just right for these two." Adrian stood at the front of the church, his usual corporate polish replaced by quiet dignity in a simple black suit. His hands fidgeted slightly with his cuffs, not from doubt, but from the overwhelming rightness of this moment. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows cast colored patterns across his face, softening the lines that worry and loneliness had etched there over the years. The old pipe organ began playing softly as the church doors opened. Daisy appeared in the doorway, and Adrian's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple white gown with long sleeves, borrowed from the church's collection of donated dresses and altered by the ladies of the quilting circle. Her dark hair was swept back with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of winter roses tied with ribbon. As she began walking down the aisle, Adrian saw not the glamorous engagement they'd staged in New York, but something far more precious: pure, unadorned love illuminated by faith. Tears welled in his eyes as he watched her approach, remembering that first night when she'd knelt beside him, saving more than just his life. The townsfolk filled every pew, many standing along the walls. Children from the shelter sat up front, their eyes wide with wonder at the fairy tale transformation of their friend Miss Daisy. Even some of Adrian's business associates who had discovered his whereabouts had slipped quietly into back rows, touched by the humble beauty of this unexpected ceremony. When Daisy reached the altar, her eyes met Adrian's with a smile that outshone all the candles. The elderly pastor stepped forward, his weathered face creased with joy as he welcomed everyone to this Christmas morning celebration of love and redemption. Rather than traditional vows, Daisy had written their promises herself, capturing the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. Adrian's voice was thick with emotion as he repeated after her, "I promise to build our home on prayer and peace, not on worldly wealth or fame, to remember that true riches lie in moments of grace and acts of service, to cherish the miracle that brought us together, and to seek God's purpose in all we do." Daisy's voice trembled slightly but grew stronger as she continued. "I promise to walk beside you in faith, to remind you of the light when shadows fall, and to help you see the divine in life's ordinary moments, to create a sanctuary of love where healing can grow and hope can flourish." The congregation sat spellbound as these simple yet profound promises filled the sacred space. Many wiped away tears, moved by the authentic love radiating from the couple before them. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian drew Daisy close. Their first kiss as married couple echoed that life-changing moment months ago in his penthouse. But this time, instead of desperate rescue, it was filled with joy and promise. The church erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face their assembled friends, both glowing with happiness. After the ceremony, the celebration spilled out onto the snow-covered church steps. Children threw rice and rose petals, while the older folks hugged the newlyweds and offered blessings. Instead of a formal reception, Adrian and Daisy had arranged for hot chocolate and Christmas cookies to be served to everyone, creating an atmosphere of warm community rather than rigid formality. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow, the couple changed into warm winter clothes. They had decided to spend their wedding evening delivering Christmas dinners to homebound residents and serving meals at the shelter. Walking hand in hand through the gently falling snow, they carried baskets of food and small gifts. The shelter's main room had been transformed with twinkling lights and garlands. Residents young and old gathered around long tables, sharing not just food, but stories and laughter. Adrian moved easily among them now, no longer the distant billionaire, but a man who had found his true calling in service to others. As they worked together, serving meals, Daisy caught moments when Adrian would pause, watching the scene with wonder. Children playing with new toys, elderly couples sharing slices of pie, younger men and women finding hope in the warmth of community. This was wealth of a different kind, she knew, and far more precious than anything his empire had offered. Later, as they walked back through the falling snow, Daisy squeezed Adrian's hand and whispered softly, "Don't move." He looked at her questioningly, remembering those same words from that fateful night. But this time her eyes sparkled with joy as she added, "We're exactly where God wants us to be." Adrian pulled her close, understanding completely. The snow continued falling softly around them as lights glowed warmly from windows throughout the town. Their story had come full circle, from a moment of crisis in a sterile penthouse to this peaceful Christmas evening in a small town where they'd found their true purpose together. The scene widened slowly, drawing back to reveal the entire town glowing softly under the snowy sky. Church bells rang out once more, their sweet notes carrying a message of hope across the peaceful landscape. Here in this humble setting, surrounded by genuine love and simple faith, two souls had found their miracle, not in wealth or fame, but in the transformative power of compassion, service, and everlasting love. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.